Welcome everyone to our Corporate Social Responsibility 101. I'm Jess Walzer, manager at Civic. We're an organization based in Colorado that is really focused on providing the resources and connections to help any organization, no matter the size, industry, or budget, create a successful social responsibility program. I'm excited to partner with Jennifer Forman, who will introduce herself shortly, to host this program for you. By the end of it, you'll understand key elements to a successful, future-focused CSR program. Just a quick few housekeeping notes before we take this off. This is being recorded. The recording and all resources mentioned will be shared out by Civic tomorrow in a follow-up email, so we encourage you to keep an eye out for that. This session does have live captions, so if you'd like to put those on, please do so. If you have any technical issues, please reach out to me, Jess Welzer of Civic, and I'll be happy to help. And then we, of course, encourage you to engage in the chat. We want this time to be fun, connecting, and as enjoyable as possible. So feel free to post reflections, resources, comments, questions, anything like that, as we'll be monitoring the chat and encouraging you to jump in if you would like. So Jennifer, I'll let you take it over now.
Great. Thank you, Jess. It's been great working with Jess and all the wonderful people of Civic. I love their mission, what they do for us here in Colorado. So I am Jennifer Forman. I have the excellent opportunity to talk about my very favorite topic today. And as Jess knows, I could talk for hours and hours and hours, but I'll do my best to condense it down and make it relevant for you. We are going to dive into corporate social responsibility. We are going to talk about trends and must-haves in your program. This is CSR 101, but I'm going to try to pepper in some really interesting happenings out there in the field. So I will start sharing my screen, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what I'm doing now and my background. I am big on interruptions. So if you would like to ask a question or get clarification on something as we go along, please go ahead and put it in the chat. And if things are adding up, Jess will wave a flag, stop me, and we'll address your questions. But I think it'll be a lot more valuable for all of us if we are able to have a little bit of give and take, and you don't just have to listen to me talk for the next hour. So let's see, Jess, I'm going to share my screen. How's that? Nice. Okay. Technical challenge 1 accomplished. All right. So just for a couple of minutes, I'll tell you what it is that I'm doing. I am currently teaching the University of Colorado's Certificate in Corporate Social Responsibility course that is offered through the Leeds School of Business. Civic has been just a terrific partner in supporting the course and supporting the type of work that we are teaching, hoping to get more people out there using business as a force for good. And if you're a Civic member, I believe there's a discount if you're interested in taking the course. It's 16 weeks. There are 2 ways to take it. You can join me live in person or my wonderful colleague, Pete Dignan, who teaches the online version. It's offered in the fall and the spring, in Boulder and in Denver. And each week we try to step back and go into each CSR topic, do a little bit of a deep dive, and try to tackle a lot of different things that fall under that CSR umbrella. We also bring in guest speakers working in many different facets of CSR, and that helps give us that up-to-the-minute information about what's really happening in the business world at any given time. So I'm going to pull some intel from that class and from what we learn through those speakers and try to share that with you today to get some of the latest trends that are happening out there. In addition to that, I also am a CSR consultant through my company, Make.More.Good. I help small and mid-sized businesses work on CSR-related projects, anything really from strategy to communications to training. I do get a question a lot about how I got started in this business, and I definitely took a roundabout path, I think, as many of my peers did. I noticed I spent a lot of time in nonprofit, and a big part of my heart is still in that nonprofit world. And I realized as I was working with corporations on social impact planning, helping align to their goals, that I just loved that work. And so I took this very certificate that I'm teaching now, and that was a good pivot point to start working on the other side, on the corporate side, and doing some consulting work. I did a little bit of pro bono work here and there until I was able to build up my resume. And then PopSockets became one of my clients. They're a big success story here in Colorado, the little grips that go on the back of your phone. They were my client, and I was hired on there to become their director of corporate citizenship for 2 years. So I think, what I was able to bring from nonprofit was how to build high-performing social impact programs and discipline in measurement, because we all need to do that if we're in the development side to attract grants. It also taught me about leadership with empathy, ethics, what's really happening on the ground, at least in Denver. And so that became a really interesting base from which to do this type of CSR work. And one other thing I want to mention before I get started is that CSR jobs come with many different titles, and we need people throughout the company to be participating. So you are a CSR person, you have CSR responsibilities, even if you don't have CSR in your title. And hopefully this presentation today will help you think about how to get started in certain areas and maybe incorporate some of these best practices no matter where you are on your journey. So with that, I will, did anything happen here? Aha, there we go. I will get started. Our agenda today, I'm dealing with 2 screens, so patience would be awesome. I want to start with everyone today by level setting. We're going to go over some definitions and terminology, which are evolving as we speak. The industry really has a language of its own. There's a whole alphabet soup of acronyms. And to top that off, it is evolving at lightning speed. I just listened to a podcast today where they said, pretty sure in the last 10 minutes, more has happened in this industry in the last 10 years. And you could say that every single day, just so much emphasis and focus on it now. But that just makes it more exciting. And we are going to talk about why businesses should care. So if we are in a CSR role now and looking at speaking with leadership about why we should invest in this, if we're at a nonprofit and looking to talk to businesses about how we can help them, we want to have some stats and some data under our belt. We want to be able to make that case. And then I want to take a few minutes to discuss ESG, because there's a lot of confusion out there about the difference between CSR and ESG, and there are a lot of similarities. So I'll try to explain that. We sometimes use the phrases interchangeably, which can lead to more confusion. So we'll take a few minutes to break that down. And then we're going to dive into the real meat, which is we're going to look at a full impact cycle. We're going to talk about the major building blocks and the processes involved in setting up and managing an effective CSR program in 2022. We'll touch on brand purpose within that. We'll touch on the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, and environmental sustainability. And we're going to have a couple quizzes in there too, so we'll hope to keep your attention. Okay, everybody ready? Here we go. Here we go, as soon as I can get my technology working. All right, crazy acronyms. Lots and lots of them. This is a tiny sampling of the types of language, the types of acronyms you're going to hear thrown around when you talk about CSR and ESG. CSR, corporate social responsibility, really anything that a business is doing to do good, to make a positive difference in the world. ESG, environmental, social, and governance, and we're going to go over those in detail. You'll hear those thrown around quite a lot. DE&I, short for diversity, equity, and inclusion, also known as JEDI in some places, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Belonging is a word that fits into that category too. So that acronym should, if it isn't already, be showing up in just about every CSR plan. GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, becoming more and more important every single day. SBTs, science-based targets. We'll touch on that as we look at things that are happening in the world of environmental responsibility. GRI and also SASB, TCFD, CDP, these are all frameworks. They are frameworks for collecting and measuring data, presenting data around CSR programs to the world, to investors, to the community, to your employees. There came out of the investment world where people were looking for some way to compare apples to apples. And so these frameworks provided instruction and guidance on how companies can record and present where they are with their CSR programs. And then SDGs, we will also spend a minute talking about that. We are now in, I think they were developed in 2015. And so we're 7 years into United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I'll wait for that slide to say more, but before I move on, I also want to tackle this word sustainability because it's used in so many different ways. It's not necessarily an acronym, but it is, for our purposes today, anything really that you can do for the long term to keep us surviving and thriving. So there's business sustainability, environmental sustainability, social sustainability, economic sustainability. Even though we hear it generally attached to environmental, sustainability really means so many different things to so many people. Okay. Here are these sustainable development goals. So why are they important? Oh, and actually they were developed in 2012, my mistake. So they've been around for 10 years, but I didn't become familiar with them until about 4 or 5 years ago, as they become more universally adopted in frameworks for businesses. So these were developed by the UN. They took a look at what issues we need as a global society. What do we have to address in order to be a sustainable planet with healthy and sustainable populations? Each one of these 17 goals has sub-goals underneath, and it has been very well accepted and adopted, probably more so than anything, I think, that any kind of framework United Nations put forward before, as a way for people to figure out what we should do. We talk a lot about what the problems are, especially around climate, but what should we be doing? So in your business, and we'll see later on through the presentations how you can more closely tie these to things that you are working on. But within your business, there may be ways for you to help push these forward. So that's definitely one of the first trends that I'll share with you. Okay. So why do we care and why should we care about this? I'm guessing that if you joined the call today, you probably already care about what's happening in our world when it comes to what businesses can do. But just in case, the status quo is really just no longer an option. The way that we have been doing business for the past 150, 200 years, we don't have the resources anymore to naturally offset what we've been extracting or offset the way in which we've been polluting. The way we've done it in the past is changing weather patterns, it's increasing sea levels, it's negatively impacting health, and it's definitely creating biodiversity loss. So in 2015, 197 countries ratified the Paris Agreement as the first ever universal, legally binding global climate change agreement. And that means we're on the hook to get this right. We have to care. We have to be able to bring this temperature down. And we have to care about more than just our own business and our own profits at this point in time. So we're seeing a real shift from that shareholder capitalism, which is how much can your business make? And how can we make sure that shareholders are successful? That's not unimportant, but we're seeing that is spreading now to stakeholder capitalism, where we're looking at all of the different entities, people involved and touched by the actions of our business. That means that it gets a little bit more complex as we start to bring in intersectionality. We can think about human rights and climate justice happening. So I have this picture here on purpose. This is gentleman in Bangladesh who is working, presumably, but he's walking through t-shirt dye. And so this is a real example of what's left behind by business. We could say that that's just environmental. It's environmental damage that perhaps business has left behind. But this turns into a health issue and a human rights issue for people that are in developing nations or people that don't have the resources to shield themselves from that kind of negative business impact. So all of these issues are starting to really combine and come together under much more broad topics. So that's why United Nations gets involved as well. We're looking at extractive versus additive now, where business could be really extractive in the past. It would business needed to think about profit, what they were making. They could make, waste, and then walk away with the profit. But what we're seeing in terms of trends, and this is such a good thing, is how can we be additive? How can business, in doing what it usually does to make a profit, how can we maybe tweak some things so that instead of just extracting, we're being additive and potentially regenerative if it's about the environment, or additive when it comes to social impact? How can we do a better job? And then regulation. If none of that convinces you that we maybe should be doing something different, the regulations are coming. We know that when it comes to diversity, California is requiring a minimum of 25% women on the board of publicly traded companies. And this is happening in terms of both race and gender. We know that regulations are coming in terms of emissions and what you can waste and how you can pollute. So if nothing else, it's going to come from external forces. So we do want to be prepared as best we can. All right, so how do you make the case? Well, the good news is there's now lots and lots of data available to support the business case for going in this direction. I think for many years we talked about ethics and what was right and why it was important in terms of societal benefit. Well, that's all important, but hey, now we have actual business data to back this up. So socially responsible business practices really are a company's license to operate these days. And if you need additional stats besides what I have here, I'll go over a few of these. You can look at places like Cone Communications. There's the ACCP website. I've pulled some things from their Making the Case document. And then there's something called the Edelman Trust Barometer. They cover a lot of this, what's the status, where are people at? When we start to look at stakeholders, all those people involved and touched by our business, which would be some of the people on this list, the consumers, employees. We know that 70% of millennials and even more Gen Z, the younger your consumer, the more they are looking to see what you are doing in these areas. And so your business will be impacted if this is the segment that you deal with. And those people are becoming employees. We know now with the Great Resignation, we're really looking at ways that we can retain and attract employees. At this point, Cone Communications has said that 88% of employees believe a company must focus on purpose and not just profit. And then I pulled one more stat recently from Edelman that says over the past 3 years, more than half of all employees were open to leaving their company for new roles, but it drops to less than 12% if they believe their company is positively impacting the world. So this really becomes a competitive edge in terms of attracting and retaining your employees. And then how about profitability? Companies with the highest ESG ratings, profits are better. There's a lot of debate out there as to whether this is causal or incidental. Regardless, there's years and years of data, and it's just getting stronger and stronger as we go forward, that the better your ESG, the better your profits. So that's why magically money is flowing. And this is what seems to be really getting the attention of the C-suite: capital. So I have this stat here that $120 billion was poured into sustainable investments, more than double 2020. But I also have another one that says 288 billion has been invested globally. This is from Fast Company, a 96% increase over all of 2019. Oh, they're both from Fast Company. Interesting. I'm sure they were looking at different measures. So you can use this data to your advantage for sure. But I think what we're definitely seeing out there, all of these job openings now, a lot of companies are realizing we have to get this together. We have to look at what our ESG plans are. We have to look at how we're operating CSR and make it very impactful to be able to attract that type of capital. So should I pause for a second and see if there are any questions? Are we good, Jess? Good, okay. All right, so what is under the CSR umbrella? We're gonna go traditionally ethical business practices, making sure that your business was operating in a really socially responsible way. And then we added on social impact. Well, how can we use philanthropy and potentially education and other things to make a positive impact in the world? Really siloed from what the business was doing. This is something separate. Maybe a business would have a foundation, maybe they would have 1 or 2 people working in this area, but this is how we operated. Added in employee engagement because I started to see that employees want to take part in this. It's important to them. And some of the stats I read you from the last slide, we can see that it does. It makes them happy. It makes them feel connected. It helps them be more productive and more excited about the space that they're in. So that led to volunteering, maybe some upskilling, the creation of ERGs we started to see about 5 years ago. Those are employee resource groups. Probably should have put those in the acronyms. Those are affinity groups for people that have usually underrepresented groups. They have something in common, come together for not just moral support, but also to make recommendations to management as well. Really helps with inclusion. And that, DEI, what happened in 2020 with the murder of George Floyd, we saw this become really a critical piece of CSR. It started to move out of just HR and into more of a CSR. How can we look at this across our business? Environmental sustainability, every day this becomes more critical for business. And then, as mentioned earlier, the way that interacts with human rights in your supply chain for sure, but also social and environmental justice and how you look at that globally. So that's what's under the CSR umbrella. And then we started to see environmental, social, and governance data collection. How do we collect data around these areas of our business? And is that the responsibility of someone in CSR? Is it the responsibility of someone in finance? It's still a little confusing. However, we're going to look at what ESG means and see that it doesn't potentially sit with any one individual at the company. It's actually better if everyone gets involved in it. ESG used to look really just at risk mitigation. That's what it was all about, and that's why it sat in finance. But we're starting to see it looked at as an opportunity to improve and even help solve these risks. So companies used to do ESG scores, and it would disclose where they were exposed in certain areas and then tie a financial risk to that. And that's how an investor would look at their company as to whether or not they were performing in these areas and start to use those frameworks like that GRI and SASB to compare them. But risks are opportunities. And so that's how ESG started to make its way out of finance and into other areas. So today what we're going to do, if hopefully that was your level setting before we get into ESG, is I'm going to talk about how you can build a CSR program using an ESG framework. And we're going to bridge that traditional siloed model where everyone in the company was responsible for a different piece of ESG and the CSR department was responsible for all the happy social impact things. We're going to look at blending those frameworks together and really creating a future-oriented model. All right. So going deep, we're still in our level setting, understanding phase. We're going to go a little deeper into ESG now. Okay. So what are we talking about with environmental? That one's fairly straightforward. It's what we used to say as planet when we were talking about people, planet, and profit. The 3 Ps were very popular for a while because we didn't have enough acronyms out there. So this is planet. And again, in the past, this ESG data was measuring the risks and potential costs to the business. So what happens if sea level rises? Are we exposed? What would happen? And what would that cost us? Do we need to do something about that to make sure that we're protected? But we're now also looking at the business's impact on these areas and how businesses can innovate to reduce that risk. So where biodiversity loss, without honeybees, how are we going to actually keep making almond butter? Now we're looking at how can we, as a company, improve honeybee populations, not just the financial risk on the books, but how can we be regenerative? Social, so what we used to call people. And I think you'll recognize most of these on the right-hand side. Human capital, everything that we can do in terms of human capital, and that issue is just rising in importance every day. They're all important, so don't get me wrong, DE&I, but maybe some things that you hadn't thought about that are becoming critical in this sector, and that is cybersecurity and customer privacy. We're starting to see those issues rise up as a real social concern, and not just within your own walls, but what about how you manufacture things, where you buy things? Have you looked at the human rights that are impacted there? As I mentioned before, that human rights piece really intersects with the E. What are we doing that may that may impact people, but due to our environmental practices? So we also take into account the health and wellness of our employees, the local communities, and also often overlooked is public policy. And so I want to demonstrate that because I just literally, as I was getting ready for this webinar, heard a great story about a retirement community, someone trying to just hang on to their business, I think somewhere on the East Coast, cannot get employees. And they were saying, the interview was saying, just pay more. Well, they can't pay more because they are dependent on Medicaid. So they're stuck. They have done their best to bring employees into the mix and try to do all of these great CSR things, make them feel welcome, make them feel appreciated, but they're losing their employees to the Amazon warehouse centers who are offering signing bonuses and college tuition right now to pull them away. So here's what's interesting where it gets to public policy. They are becoming, with their association, more involved in advocating for immigration, for opening up immigration, because this is a way that they are going to be able to attract more workers that can fulfill what they need to run as a business, and in an ethical sense, to not have to close. These are places where seniors go for the remaining years of their lives, people without necessarily a lot of income to pay, who are reliant on Medicaid. There will be nowhere for them to go. And so all of a sudden public policy gets involved, and that can be looked at as something else under the S in your business. And that G that is often very misunderstood. And so I think I have a few of my students on the line, and they'll recognize me saying that the easiest way I explain governance is that there's no funny business. There's just absolutely no funny business going on at this company. So governance really explains how ESG and other business decisions are made, and who is accountable for those. It looks at the mechanisms that are in place to prevent unethical behaviors or shortcuts. If you're a global company, it looks at things like anti-corruption policies. It also looks at executive and board compensation. So that becomes an issue where you want your executives and your board to be paid enough to be very motivated to work for the success of the business, but not so high that it's totally out of line with what the expectations are around employees. All of this comes under the governance umbrella. So governance is really woven through so many other issues, policy and oversight. But yeah, you can always remember that phrase, no funny business. Okay, we're going to stop for a minute and we're going to do a quiz, see where you are. Let's think about these three things. Also, know I really like trick questions. And where they would belong. Are they an E, are they an S, or a G? So if you'll share in the chat, what about your procurement team who is seeking minority-owned suppliers? Where do you think that would fit? Would it be an E, an S, or a G? Let's see if I can open this chat. S is social. G, S is. Okay, mostly S. Yes, it's an S. It's definitely an S. This is a place where your procurement team, who doesn't necessarily wear a CSR hat, can adjust their RFPs to start asking who owns this business and how is it staffed, and potentially incorporate a little more diversity into the supply chain. So diversity, that's an S. Okay, what about this one? Who is accountable for making your online blog accessible? So accessible to someone who may have visual impairment. S's, S's. S's, good job, you guys, but there's a trick. There's a trick in this question. There are some G's. All right, so I use the word accountable. Who is eventually accountable for making sure that happens? The accountability piece is G. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's social. The practice is social. But in the end, what executive or board committee is fully accountable for seeing that these things are implemented and that they're working? That is a governance issue. So that one was quite a trick. All right. Yeah. Oh, tricky. Yeah. Number 3, at the office, should we be using compostable cups or water bottles? E, mainly E's. Yeah, E and G. Now see, people are getting into my tricks. Yeah. All right. E. Yeah, I would call this one an E. Again, you can stretch these to fall under multiple categories. This is an E, looking at environmental and how you're going to handle waste or water. And as we go to the next stage in the presentation, we'll figure out how you might prioritize that. But you may have competing demands here. You want to reduce waste, also reduce water. And I know a company who just started sticking with compostable cups because they realized that water was their biggest issue. And what was happening with composting cups used a lot less water than having to wash out that water bottle every single day. So lo and behold, they had to measure it though and make sure and use data to inform that decision, but that stuck with what they were trying to do for the environment. So, okay, good job, everyone. Close down that chat. Thanks for participating. Okay, are you ready? Buckle up now, because the rubber's going to hit the road on this one. We are going to start looking ahead at building that CSR, all your programs for CSR on an ESG framework. We're going to add more discipline to our CSR programs, more rigor around what it is that we do, and we're going to future-proof them by borrowing those elements out of ESG and what investors and others are looking for at this point in time. Okay, we're going to do that by working today through this impact cycle. I'm calling it an impact cycle. You could call it pretty much whatever you want, but it is the 5 steps to developing and managing an effective CSR program. This is going to help you develop pillars that are really based squarely on stakeholder feedback. It'll help you answer to those stakeholders, including your C-suite and investors, and prepare you to focus and deliver really the greatest impact for the dollars that you're investing. I like to say that CSR in general is a blend really of art and science. I think you'll find a lot of people in this field say the same thing. The science here is in the process. The art is going to lie in how you go about implementing each stage. So totally easy, right? Super simple. We will get started with materiality. That is a phrase very often, let's advance this slide, very often associated with financial metrics. Again, it came out of that financial investment world. What are our material issues? But it really works here for CSR. Trying to figure out where your company should be focusing your time, treasure, and talent. So this is step one in developing your program. What are our material issues? And in order to find out, you can wait. Your CEO can tell you what your material issues are or what you need to focus on. But really, the better practice is to ask. Find out what is impacting and affecting your stakeholders, all of them. And those are customers, employees, investors, vendors, partners, community members, and there might be more depending on your industry. This can look a little different for every industry, but again, it's people or entities impacted by what it is that you're doing in business. Find out what's important to them. What do they think is absolutely critical? And then when you've gathered all that, remember to think about the business as well. Is there anything on this list that no one has mentioned, but could be really important? Like, is there a regulation that's changing that we need to be prepared for? And then we rank those issues. So in the simplest terms, you're really asking people what's important in terms of economic, environmental, and social sustainability. When it's done correctly, you end up getting a chart like this. So this is Nestle's, the results of their materiality assessment. And they would have done it with probably, it's a huge company, so they would have hired specialist consultants, but you can really just do that through asking. They identified the economic, social, and environmental issues that were most important by interviewing 72 key internal and external stakeholders, and they asked them to rank these issues. So you would put a list together of what are your issues and risks, and notice that here we're moving away from what we want to do, and even maybe what we've traditionally done as a business, and we're focusing instead on what we really need to do. So this can include policy implications. It might be, strong on the environmental side if you're dependent on clean water. But let's look at this x-axis here. What is important to, oh, wait, is this the x-axis? I'm starting to forget. This is the x. Well, let's say the horizontal one, because I've forgotten my algebra. On this side, you're looking at what is important to your stakeholders and you're having them rank them. On this end, you're looking at what's really business critical. And you'll start to see as they come together, lo and behold, climate and decarbonization is the top most important issue for both stakeholders and the business. And so there are many other issues that come up, but you start to have a ranking of what you cannot ignore, what is really going to be critically important for the future. So this means that there's the most major risk, and there's also major concern, but it's also going to be an opportunity to make a really positive difference. This starts to inform our impact pillars. It also becomes a guide for marketing and communications. Once you've learned all of this and figured out where all of these different groups are, how they feel about these things, it can really start to inform your decision-making going forward. So to recap here, before we move on to the next stage, things that you must have when you look at materiality or stakeholder involvement. This is just not something that your executives can go away on a retreat and come back and decide what those issues are. You have to be involving lots and lots of people. And you cannot forget economic sustainability for your business. No matter how passionately your stakeholders may feel about something like animal welfare, you have to be doing the things that are also going to keep your business alive and well and thriving. What I'm seeing for trends in this area are dynamic materiality. So this goes a little bit beyond CSR 101. Materiality tends to be static. It's something that people work on maybe once every 2 years, maybe once every 3 years. But the world is changing so quickly that we're starting to see opportunities for dynamic materiality and check-ins much more often, figuring out ways that we can listen and learn about what's going on in the world. So, for example, in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, diversity and diversity in leadership and what companies were doing in order to promote a more culturally competent world really flew up in importance. And if you were waiting, if you were in your cycle where you were going to wait another 3 years to do your materiality assessment, you would have been really far behind. So this dynamic materiality and opening up, and then moving away from siloed departments who work on certain issues, and making sure that once we have determined what our material issues are, that many different departments are working on them simultaneously, that we're all working in a company to advance forward those issues and help solve them. And so, oh, I already gave away my example about consistent listening, but COVID as well. I mean, with COVID changed a lot of things, and health and wellness became an utmost priority for a little while. So we have to be agile when it comes to materiality. All right, so now we're going to look at strategy and partnerships. This is really going to be the biggest, meatiest part of this impact cycle, because this is where you can get really creative. We are going to talk also about brand purpose when it comes to strategy. Brand purpose, it's overarching. It's over everything. You have to remember what your brand purpose is, but knowing where you're going, you can take your materiality and start to think about how can we achieve that purpose in the most positive way. So we're going to focus on those issues. We're going to mitigate our negative impacts, and we're going to try to innovate, amplify, solve, regenerate. We're going to be additive where we can be, where we are, our company, with our knowledge and our business practices. We are going to figure out what we're uniquely positioned to advance in the world. All right, so I'm going to give you just a minute to read these brand purposes. So you want to think about these as a North Star. And as you start designing all of your strategies for your material issues, you want to remember what your overarching purpose is. Okay. I think visually, so hopefully this helps you, because we've thrown a lot of things at you already. That overarching purpose. So we're going to, company X, they build tech to make life easier. That's their purpose. And they did a materiality assessment, and they realized, you know, one of our big issues is diversity, equity, and inclusion. We need a gender balanced leadership team. We have all men, and I'm afraid that we won't be able to make life easier for 50% of the population because we don't have access to women helping us figure out what would make their life easier. It's a very unique, different life experience to go through life as a woman. And so how are we going to make their life easier? We're at a real disadvantage with our all male leadership team. I don't know. This is a risk, and it's also an opportunity. So we're going to determine that from our materiality assessment, that DE&I is a core pillar. Then we will start developing strategies around that core pillar. So for instance, well, maybe we do have some women at the company who can help us figure out how to get ahead here, who want to join together and share information, share skill sets, and support each other. So let's definitely create a women's employee resource group. And then here's something else. We can work, if we don't see a lot of women in the pipeline, why don't we work with a nonprofit partner, maybe Girls Who Code, so that we can watch and see and learn how we can bring more women into the fold. If we don't, I hear this from many men, we don't know any women. so well, let's fix that. We can help you. And then we'll get to, in the next section, metrics. How are you going to measure whether or not this is working? So this is really the hierarchy of how things start to come together. You have your purpose, you figure out your materiality issues and how you can reduce harm or improve in those areas. So I would assume that issue 2 might be something like environment. Issue 3 could be about regulation. You might have strategies that help you solve a couple of your materiality issues. And that would be excellent. So it's not like you have to have exactly one strategy to solve one problem. You can get really creative here, and we'll go through a couple of examples. So how does this play out in real life? Actually, I want to tell you about one really creative example. No, I'm going to save it. Sorry, I'm just going to make you excited. Don't let me forget. I have one really fun one. All right, so Lyft, great company. So Lyft, and even this information is a little old, but I think it really proves the point. So Lyft's purpose is to improve lives through transportation. Makes perfect sense. I think very aligned with who they are. That's their purpose. As you can imagine, one of the issues that might be really high on their materiality assessment would be safety. Safety is a major concern, probably for their staff and probably for their customers. And so looking at that, how can we help? How can we be better in that area? What would our strategy be? So with their purpose in mind, knowing what their material issue might be, they decided we're going to help domestic violence survivors. So they're mitigating the impact of negativity by giving grants and providing free rides, partnering with nonprofits to help reduce domestic violence. And then I also think, it doesn't show up here, but they could be really additive as well by maybe hosting anger management trainings or something else to proactively try to reduce that. But they've chosen that as an issue. And I think what's really important here, so not only are they getting usually women, but anyone out of really dangerous situations, that's wonderful. But look at this, 93% of their employees say that they come to work because of their focus on social and environmental impact. So this is like a triple whammy in that they've chosen a really important issue, solve some of their material issues, works directly to promote their brand purpose, and also retains employees. And so I think, in addition, it gives them brand affinity. Someone like me reads that and I will call Lyft over Uber anytime. So this is, it's hitting their profits as well. It's a positive in many different directions. So I like how they chose their issue. Okay, Nike, and remember, they're a behemoth. They have just a lot of money. Their purpose, to move the world forward, breaking barriers and building community to change the game for all. And they did come out strong because this is their brand purpose. They really came out strong around equality, especially in 2020, but they had been in that game for a very long time because it was part of their brand purpose. So they had a role to play. And I'm going to see if hopefully this works, because I'm going to play you an ad. They have support from the very top. Their co-founder, Phil Knight, has said, you can't try and go down the middle of the road on these issues. Let's run with equality. It's important to us. Let's do it. So marketing has been given the dollars as well. Let's see. Are you seeing an ad? Yes, okay, great. Oh, where can I play it? Sorry, guys. Play.
Is this the land history promised? Here, within these lines. Here, you're defined by your actions, not your looks or beliefs. Equality should have no boundaries. The bonds we find here should run past these lines. Opportunity should not discriminate. The ball should bounce the same for everyone. Worth should outshine color. If we can be equals here, we can be equals everywhere.
Stop.
Is this the land
Stop.
history promised? Here, within these lines.
Thanks. Sometimes it's helpful if I yell at it. So they've gone deep. That's marketing. But they also go really deep into this issue with employees, with human rights in their supply chain, with their philanthropy, with leadership training, and with the creation of their products to try to level the playing field. So you can see how this strategy has embedded across their company. Okay, so strategy elements of a strong CSR strategy, definitely environmental sustainability, DE&I, employee engagement. We talked about volunteering, ERGs, social impact and corporate philanthropy, human rights and supply chain, and public policy. I really want to keep dwelling on that one. Those are good elements under strategy, but it gets very creative as to how those play out at your particular company. I'm going to take a minute now and touch on the power of diversity because this is really a must-have. My favorite quote is actually by a woman who is locally at Mile High United Way, Venetia Kerr, and she says, we tend to hire for diversity, but we onboard for conformity. And that really misses the point. Diversity is about embracing differences in thoughts and experiences and opinions. So in making sure that your company is ready when they talk about diversity to do this, it might need some training. You might need to look at other ways besides just internally to affect your whole sphere of influence. We know that at this point in time, it's not just good for society, it's so good for business. So depending on who you're trying to convince and how you're trying to make the case, it's all there. McKinsey they're one of the world's largest consulting companies, and they found that the greater an executive team's representation, the higher their likelihood of financial outperformance. There's tons of stats to back this up. The more gender diverse companies were 48% more likely to perform. Ethnically and culturally diverse companies are 36% more likely to outperform. So it's all there. At this point, it helps you leverage new markets. It helps you better understand your marketing and where you're going. There are so many great reasons to be looking at diversity. It's really a must-have. So how do we get it done? It may take some time. It may not be an overnight process, especially if you're really going to do it right and involve training, but you need to take that time, look in new places and network with people that maybe don't have the same background. This is a friend-making business, CSR, so ask your colleagues and make some new friends. It's very natural to be comfortable with people that are just like you. It's human nature. But it can really lead to homogenous thoughts. And so we need to learn about our natural biases and stretch ourselves to learn. So more important now than ever. And speaking of sphere of influences, it can be done. If you can't change your company overnight, you can look even individually at your financial investments and your purchasing power. I know for every day in the month of February, my little Google mini player in my house that I would ask about the weather would give me an interesting fact about Black History Month. So that's the way Google has looked at what their sphere of influence is, and they are being additive with what they're doing in terms of diversity. So maybe their board didn't change. I hope that the makeup of their board looks pretty good, but they're in my home telling me about Black history. It's great. Okay, next, cutting carbon. We must be doing this. Everybody must be doing this. It's just something you have to be looking at, how to reduce emissions and how to engage employees around that. So there's a lot of terms floating around like net zero, carbon neutral, climate positive. Net zero means that you are putting out emissions, but you are potentially offsetting or purchasing offsets until you get to zero. So maybe someone's planting trees to offset your emissions. As a company, you really want to strive to do better than that. The idea of those offsets are to take care of the very last bit that you can't fix yourself. But as a company, you want to be looking at, and as an individual, ways that you can reduce emissions. And then getting to carbon neutral is great, but we're actually seeing some companies strive now to be climate positive, meaning that they are finding ways to reduce carbon even more than the emissions that they put out. Even some countries are looking at doing that, so it's good to figure out how to work there. I know I have to speak just a little bit faster, but today, major announcement, 90 companies pledged to reduce emissions by 50%, working with the Department of Energy to track and improve their performance and collect and share best practices. So there is hope. There's hope here, and I think Davida is one of them, and I think Davida is on the line, so congratulations. Okay, and then the other thing that I would just really highly recommend is nonprofit partnerships. Nonprofits know their business, so whatever it is that you decide you can attack and help solve as a company, there are 1.5 million nonprofits in the US, and there's generally someone already working on the ground on that particular issue. Partner with them and use their knowledge. Don't try to go it alone and start from scratch. I'm sure those nonprofits on the phone here would agree. They can work with you, and with your dollars and your influence, they can do even more than they could on their own. So as we talked about, your vulnerabilities are opportunities. Don't be afraid of being really transparent about what's going on. You can't really get away with much anymore in the age of social media and cancel culture. You don't want to be hiding things away. This is what happens. You get called out. And so I love what happened in this situation. They got called out by Greenpeace on these very large companies, but P&G, who's doing really, really well now, they said, okay, help us, Greenpeace. They partnered with a nonprofit who had the expertise, and they brought them into the company to improve their practices. So now they're major innovators in terms of reducing environmental footprint. So don't worry about shining a light on where you need help. And then thinking about when profit actually becomes the bigger risk for your companies. This is a great example about when Macy's decided to pull fur. I mean, they had 680 department stores, and they closed down a really huge profit center because their risk was too high. They listened to their stakeholders, their customers and their employee resource groups and their nonprofit partner, and they said, that's it, we can't do it. So they gave up money to save risk. And hopefully because it was the ethical thing to do, but regardless, it became too big of a risk. Okay, I want to take a minute and talk about how this plays out in your entire value chain. We're hearing not just supply chain, but value chain used much more widely now. These are all of the different things that go into helping your business make a profit. So when you do choose an issue and you choose strategies, you can look at all of these different departments. If emissions reduction is one of your pillar can the sales department reduce their plane travel? Can all employees be incentivized to use public transportation, or can packaging and waste be reduced to bring emissions down? This can happen all across your value chain. So again, we're moving away from that silo. This is not the green team's job to make sure everyone is recycling paper at the office. This becomes embedded into the company. All right, strategy recap. All right, we talked about the must-haves, DE&I, environmental sustainability, and aligning your social impact to your brand purpose. Trends here, go deep, pick an issue and go really, really deep on that. We're also seeing more trust-based philanthropy when you work with a nonprofit, which is fantastic. And that means being a little less prescriptive with what you want to happen, and making multi-year commitments and trusting that the nonprofit is going to tell you how they can make the most impact. Also seeing a lot around circular economy, companies looking at how, not just on the manufacturing end, but on the buying end as well. When you purchase something or make something, what's going to happen to it at the end of life? And how can it be regenerative? How can we take the parts back and make something new? Not just dump it and move on to the next thing. So this is great. IKEA is doing a fantastic job in that area. And then here's my example about looking across the entire value chain for opportunity. When VF, local to Denver, found that they wanted to make a difference, a positive difference in women's issues and child rights, they were very surprised to find out that they felt the marketing stage of their value chain was a place where they could make the most difference. So it wasn't necessarily reinventing the wheel. It was looking at how they were putting out images and making sure that they were emphasizing that, girls can snowboard and boys are just as interested in that piece of clothing as a girl. So it's really interesting. All right, gotta keep going. Metrics, now we're at measuring. So, what gets measured gets managed. You've heard that before, and what gets managed generally improves. So how will I know if my company's moving in the right directions? You do have to goal set around this. We cannot say, I hope we do well. We really need to know, are we doing well? Are we making a difference in these areas, especially around environmental sustainability? It's getting more and more critical. So you want time-bound goals. You're going to need, as a CSR person, friends across the entire organization to help you with metrics and measurement and data collection. And you're also going to have to be a little agile. Even if you set your goals and you set your KPIs to know if you're on track, things happen. As we all know, things happen in the world. Things blow up, things go differently. Be ready to be transparent and explain that. That's okay, but you still need to track that data and say, well, we only got to 10% of our goal. This is why we switched. We felt we could make a stronger impact in this area. All right, so measuring environmental impact, these are most common that you'd measure greenhouse gas emissions, waste, and water. And there are a lot of frameworks out there, but primarily GRI and SASB can provide industry-specific information. And if you want a job right now, learn how to measure greenhouse gas emissions, because just about everybody needs to get it done, and there are very few people who can do it. These regulations, these measurement tactics are changing all the time, literally every day. So I would suggest following ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, and watching what they come out with. They're looking to develop universally, globally accepted measurements that are on par with financially accepted measurements and tracking systems for environmental impact. And then measuring social impact. So I think, again, if you had a nonprofit upbringing, you might be pretty good at this, but I really encourage companies to measure the end result. So how were people positively affected? It becomes habitual, I think, to say we did, this many volunteer hours, but what happened? What happened? Because that's how you're going to keep your stakeholders engaged in what you actually did. So I use the example of volunteer hours actually improving reading comprehension, for example. that's what you want to say. You help 20 children improve their grade level or something along those lines. And then also look at internal measures. Do you have better employee satisfaction? Do you have, ask the salespeople, how's that program playing out? Are our customers hearing about it? Do they like it? Because you're going to see some really nice internal measures around your social impact efforts as well. Okay, metrics recap. So we didn't talk, oops, too far. We didn't talk much about the Paris Accord, except at the very beginning. We have to bring the temperature down by 1.5 degrees by 2030. Science-based targets help you do that. They do the math. So we can go into that. That's a whole other webinar. But know that compliance to those targets is really, at this point, a must-have. You have to figure out where you are, what industry you're in, and how much you need to bring your emissions down. Understand your diversity metrics. At this point, even if you're not reporting on it, you really need to benchmark where you are and look at trends in your company and look at what might need shoring up. And then if you're public, third-party verification is usually really important for all of those metrics that you gather. So the trends, we mentioned the SBTs, executive compensation is being tied to these ESG metrics and measures now. We're seeing more and more companies adopt that, especially as the capital markets and capital infusion rely on ESG measures. So now executives are being judged on their performance in these areas. And then I'm seeing more reporting on diversity and equity, and especially in pay equity reports, which are required in the UK. And I think we'll see them required in more countries soon, where we're not just looking at equality, equal pay for equal work. So that is, does a man and a woman make the same amount of money, or does an African American make the same amount of money as an Asian person? That's equal pay for equal work. We're looking at a whole company and saying, okay, this whole company makes $2 million in profit a year. How much do men take home, and how much do women take home? And you're striving for 50-50. How much does it look like America in terms of how much does the African American component of our staff take home, and how much does our Asian component of our staff take home, and why is it so out of whack? And are we continuing down that path, or are we doing things to improve that? So I'm seeing a lot of that. Okay. Oh, and here's a good example for metrics that Warby Parker gave. And it was not just talking about the number of pairs of glasses that they gave away, but they talked about what happened. And it is that monthly income was improved by 20% when people received a pair of glasses. So that's the kind of impact that you're looking for. Sorry, I know I'm jumping around from environmental to social, but they're all involved. All right, we're ready to go to reporting. We're on number 4, reporting. How do we share these metrics and stories, and thinking about what's important to each stakeholder? So again, we talked about transparency, share it all. You would rather share it all. There's a lot of data out there to show that people are much more forgiving if they know that you're aware of the issue and you're trying to correct it than pretending it doesn't exist or trying to hide it away. So be open about where you are and explain it. And then, add in some storytelling. Is your storytelling really authentic? Is it, you want to be humble, but not too humble. Sometimes I find it's better to have a partner actually share the success. So if you have a nonprofit partner and they're willing to talk about your partnership, that can give a lot more credibility to what you do than when you as a company just go out and say, look, aren't we great? We made all of this stuff better. If the nonprofit explains it, it can really be very powerful and can garner more trust. Okay, I was going to give you, yeah, here we go. The IKEA sustainability report. Jess, how are we doing on time?
Yeah, so we have 20 minutes left, but if we want to leave some time for networking and discussions and breakout groups, I would say a little bit, definitely less than that, 10 minutes
Yeah,
if that works for you.
I'm going to go into overdrive. All right. But I do want to open up a report and show you some important things. For instance, about how all of this comes together in a report. Don't get dizzy here, but let's look at how IKEA talks about water. They do a whole section on environmental, transforming into a circular business. And they go over the key activities, becoming climate positive, some of these issues that we've talked about. I'm just going to be reading out headlines: regeneration, biodiversity. Again, don't get dizzy. I just want to get to a certain page. And then we get into the social. So they started with the E and now we're at the S. These are some of the issues they've decided to go around: fair and equal. And that plays out with their own employees and in their supply chain, responsible wage practices. Here, I know they call out the data show there's still some way to go toward gender equality. We also want to be able to represent all aspects of gender and diversity. So they're saying we don't have this figured out, but we're trying, and here are our numbers. And then further down, they're talking about human rights and their supply chain. They have to explain how they engage their stakeholders in this process. They had to explain their governance, who oversees this whole sustainability piece. And they've tied a lot of what they're doing. Now, this is a huge company, so they have connected to a lot of those United Nations SDG goals. But a smaller company, I would only suggest ever have like 2 to 3 at most that they're working on, so that you can really remain focused. So, all right. All right, how about that for speed? There was a reporting recap: transparency and defined goals. Trends are to tie to UN SDGs and to prepare communications for different audiences. I was going to show you one more, but we don't have time. The Intel company has a report builder now, so that you can go into Intel and just check off the sections that you're interested in. And that's how they're addressing different audiences with those communications. Maybe you're just interested in their climate disclosures. Maybe you're just interested in what they're doing around diversity. So you can pick and choose. And I'm seeing a lot of that start to come out. Okay. I'm a talker about this stuff. All right, we're getting into evaluation now, which is our final stage. This is where we, first of all, we pause and we celebrate how far we've come, because our report is out. We're really excited, but we need to stop now before we just go right into another materiality assessment and figure out what's the landscape like now, what's happening in the world, what's going on in terms of regulations, how have views shifted, and how are our company goals looking? And that starts to help frame what you might be asking in terms of your materiality assessment for the next year. So yeah, in terms of must-haves, long-term commitment here when it comes to evaluating, looking at what you've done and how you're going to carry that through. The need to be agile and support network. I'm really going to say you must have peers out there in the field that are doing the same thing that you can talk with. You know, how is this impacting your business? This is what's happening at mine. The trends that we're seeing are a lot of this innovation sharing across industries or with competitors. And so if they've been able to find a way to save water in their process, they will share it across companies. It's not competitive like it is for profit dollars. It's a sharing, friend-making business. If you figured it out, you want everybody to be able to save water. And then that climate positivity, we talked about doing even better for climate. So one example, New Belgium, they're a great company to keep your eye on, doing terrific things. They have a whole toolkit, drinksustainably.com, that they share with brewers about how to reduce carbon emissions, and they share their lessons learned in an effort to get everyone's emissions down. All right, so the key takeaways here: your programs are going to be more powerful with more planning and discipline and taking that long-term view. Let purpose be your North Star. Let everything filter up to your company's purpose, and then remain nimble, rely on your values, and align your impact. There's so much more to say around these issues, but just never quite enough time. We're going to do one more super quick quiz, and then this part of the presentation is wrapped up. So get your typing fingers ready. Let's figure out what part of the impact cycle this would be. Remember, I like trick questions. Marketing designs and Instagram announcement. And they're talking about how many tons of waste they saved from the landfill. Anyone tell me 1 through 5, which part of the impact cycle that is? 4, 4, 4. Everyone got it. That's great. I wondered if you thought it might be strategy because it's marketing, but you're right. It's sharing out reporting. Okay, the staff are asked to discuss volunteering program boosts, so we can add to your volunteering hours, or we can do a 401k increase. What part of this process is that? Mainly ones. Evaluation, not as clear. Materiality. This one's materiality. This is weighing out the issues and trying to survey your stakeholders about what they feel is important. So that's kind of an S. And so you're looking at asking them and trying to figure out the answers. Okay, facilities install solar panels and monitors utility bills for usage reduction. Trick question. Okay, I've got some 3s. Yeah, the trick here is that it's 2 and 3. The strategy is putting on the solar panels, and they're collecting the metrics. That's good. So I think you get the idea. I'm going to stop so that we definitely have time for questions. But you can see some of these things bridge multiple categories, and I hope that helped just cement the information. So, okay, that's where we're going to stop. And I'll open it up, Jess, if you want to throw questions, or anyone else.
Yeah, happy to jump in here. We had 2 great questions in the chat. So the first question, Jennifer, is what advice would you give to someone currently working in a nonprofit philanthropy sector or area, but who wants to shift their career to CSR or social impact work?
So very common question. I think looking at what your skills are in nonprofit and knowing that you may need a pivot job in between. So how can, if you're in marketing at a nonprofit or fundraising, that really transfers pretty nicely to marketing or potentially some inside sales at a company that's doing this really, really well. And then you can contribute from that role at a for-profit. You can contribute to this ESG and serve on ERG committees or start one of your own and build up your knowledge. And I'm an advocate of education as well. I mean, take the class if you can, take a course, read all the time. Because if you're reading all the time and continuing your own education, you're going to be well ahead of where other people are in this field, just simply because everything is evolving so quickly. So never stop learning.
That's great. And then the second question we had come up is, what role does a company's mission, purpose, and social impact work play when it comes to attracting and retaining talent? Specifically, given the current talent war, how might purpose-driven brands differentiate when it comes to talent management?
Yeah, I think really important. We're seeing companies now where employees apply simply because they've heard about the social impact program. They're attracted to that company because of what the company is doing in a positive way. So I would say, because this turns out to be a really key issue, is to try to get your marketing company involved, or your marketing department involved as well, in putting together great little recaps of what you've done in terms of social impact and get it out there, include it in job boards, talk about what you're proud of in your job descriptions. You know, we are a B Corp and we were able to save X number of emissions last year and improve this last year. Please come join us. I mean, that becomes part of your recruiting in order to keep people. Your employees, also your current employees, are fantastic advocates. When they like what's happening, they will share it and they will tell people to apply because of all of the great things that are going on. So we know that it helps retain employees for sure, but pushing it out and relying on some marketing to help attract people can really give you that competitive advantage.
Great. And a quick follow-up, do you have any examples of companies that are doing it well?
Different pieces of it, absolutely. I mean, IKEA for sure. Oh, was this around attracting employees or just doing?
Attracting employees.
I think, yeah, I've seen a few do really well on LinkedIn. They talk on LinkedIn specifically about their good works in terms of social impact. And so I know I see VF do it quite a bit. And I'm sure there are others out there that I maybe just haven't quite noticed. I do see some of the good works that Delta Dental is doing, but making sure that you're advertising that in the same place that you're looking for employees. So how else are you getting out into the community to meet with potential employees, especially from underrepresented groups? Where are you going and how are you talking about what you're doing in the community with those particular people?
All right, well, we'll still have some people hopping back on here, but I think we did have some people jump off there. I first just want to say huge thank you, Jennifer, for all of your amazing work you put into this and all the wisdom you shared with us. I know I learned so much about it, about the program components, must-haves, and current trends. Anything you'd like to add?
Just thank you for sharing the time. I mean, the more people that get involved in this, the better the world's going to be. So thank you very much. There are some resources on my website as well. We'll share the slides, but I put the UN SDGs and the impact cycle and the Making the Case document on my website if you want to download it from there. So thank you so much. LinkedIn with me if you like.